In half an hour we begin a great weekend's entertainment with GMTV. But now on night shift it's 5:30. Time for the latest news from home and abroad with ITN.
Good morning, it's Saturday the 4th of September. This is ITN's Morning News. Violent resistance has broken out in the Israeli-occupied territories against the PLO's plan to strike a peace deal with Israel. Gunmen from the PLO's Fatah group opened fire on members of a radical faction in the Gaza Strip. Meanwhile, in Tunis, PLO leader Yasser Arafat has been fighting to rally Fatah behind the deal. Radical Palestinians and Islamic militants have denounced him as a traitor. In California, the prosecution has struck a telling blow against the two black men accused of beating a truck driver on the first day of the LA riots. Their latest witness is a reporter who was in the helicopter circling overhead. He's positively identified the defendants as the men who beat a truck driver. And a retired gardener can thank the loss of his hammer for making him at least £1 million richer. Eric Laws went in search of it using a metal detector. What he found was the most valuable hoard of Roman coins and jewels ever discovered in Britain. We'll have a news update later, but now the world news, first seen last night by ITN's viewers overseas.
Hello, I'm Guy Defay with the ITN World News. I'll be bringing you the main international developments. The headlines: the tragedy of the children of Angola, ravaged by war, famine and disease. Despite protests by angry Israelis, a peace deal with the Palestinians seems to be imminent, and two British aid workers who tried to smuggle arms into Bosnia are on their way out of the country. First, the United Nations has claimed that 1,000 people are dying every day in Angola. In a country of 10 million, 2 million people have been forced to flee their homes and 10% of the population are severely malnourished. Hundreds have already died from an epidemic of measles. In one hospital in the capital Luanda, a child is dying every hour. The disaster has its roots in Angola's civil war, which government forces and UNITA rebels fought for 16 years until peace was achieved in 1991. Fighting erupted again when UNITA's leader Jonas Savimbi took up arms after losing multi-party elections last September. Since then, more than 100,000 Angolans are thought to have died from the fighting and the resulting starvation and disease.
A 2-year-old girl is rushed in, convulsing with cerebral malaria. All the tragedy and suffering of Angola etched on her father's face. The fighting restarted 9 months ago. Conditions in Angola have never been worse. There are now more children dying every day in this country than at any time in the previous 16 years of civil war. Thousands more youngsters have been orphaned during the latest conflict. 12-year-old Antonio Manuel had just arrived at Quazola Children's Home, carrying his only possessions, a ragged bundle of clothes. Lost and alone, he'd escaped the fighting in which all his family had been killed. Antonio sat down for his first good meal in weeks, the latest orphan of Angola's war.
The children are, day by day, suffering more and more. Not only is the situation getting worse for them, but our ability to respond to their needs is getting more and more difficult.
In the battle zones, most children are beyond the reach of relief aid. This time, a military helicopter had managed to rescue a handful of casualties. Among them, 7-year-old Ricardo, his arm shattered by shrapnel. But most never make it to hospital. It's believed the war is killing up to 1,000 children a month. And as refugees continue to flee from the fighting between government forces and UNITA, many more young lives are lost along the way.
The Palestine Liberation Organization says that negotiations with Israel are continuing at a secret venue in Europe in an attempt to reach a deal on mutual recognition. Meanwhile, in Tunis, the PLO leader Yasser Arafat has spent a day in talks with his Central Council. Reports indicate there's still some opposition to the peace plan, but it appears he is winning majority support. And in Paris, the Israeli Foreign Minister Shimon Peres said that an agreement with the PLO could be the catalyst for further talks. He said complete peace was very near.
As the PLO Central Council met in Tunis, in the enormous Palestinian Bekaa refugee camp outside the Jordanian capital Amman, a measure of the radical opposition Yasser Arafat and the peace deal supporters face. The Muslim Brotherhood and the Islamic Front organized this protest. They called the Gaza and Jericho first deal a shameful peace, and anger repeated both within parts of the PLO and the mainstream Fatah movement, as well as other radical strongholds across the Middle East.
We are sure that what will come will not be peace. It will be a very dangerous state will happen between the Palestinians, and this will reflect on the Arab and the Muslim. It will not be peace.
While these Palestinians threatened force, Yasser Arafat was ordering his commanders to start training PLO fighters in the Yemen for eventual police duties in the West Bank and Gaza. For more moderate and less vocal Palestinians in the Jordanian camps, many now second and third generation refugees, the vision perhaps sometime in the future of a first chance to return to areas their families once occupied on the West Bank. King Hussein of Jordan, meanwhile, has now appeared on television to praise the imminent peace accord and to appeal for an Arab summit, while openly making a dig at Arafat for not telling Jordan, Syria and Lebanon of the PLO's secret talks with Israel.
وبأن المرحلة خطيرة وتتطلب لقاء عربي ينقلنا من الواقع اللي احنا فيه ونرتفع فوق الجراحات وفوق الآلام وسوء الفهم.
Even though there may be anger at the way in which the PLO organized the current deal, nonetheless, the deal itself serves their purposes very well. Each of them would like to sign agreements with Israel, particularly Syria and Jordan. They're ready to do so in some cases, in the case of Jordan certainly, and they're waiting simply for an occasion when that can occur.
The Israeli Foreign Minister Shimon Peres was in Paris today amidst confirmation that secret Israeli negotiations with the PLO are continuing somewhere. As the French Foreign Minister congratulated Mr. Peres, things were moving fast elsewhere. Mr. Peres confirmed Israel's willingness to eventually recognize the PLO, what he calls that party.
Tout est dépendant sur les OLP. Il faut que les OLP terminent son chapitre de violence et ouvert un chapitre politique. À ce moment-là, Israël est prêt à faire la reconnaissance de cette partie-là.
And with Syria, which has its eyes on the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights, a land for peace deal appears quietly to be nearer than the virtual silence on negotiations suggests.
Avec les Syriens, l'air, c'est un air de bonne volonté. Mais la terre reste la même. Il faut changer les réalités. Et pas seulement l'atmosphère, pas seulement le climat.
But with scenes like this continuing in Gaza and elsewhere, the problem now for both Israel and the various Arab leaderships is the chasm between secret diplomacy and Palestinians who fear betrayal.
It's time for a break now, but I'll be back shortly with more ITN World News. Hello again, I'm Guy Defay and you're watching the ITN World News. 3 British children from the same family are in custody in Argentina after being rescued from a religious sex cult. They're among more than 260 youngsters taken away from homes used by the Children of God sect. Their parents